Hello, everyone. Welcome to Smart Medicine. I'm Dr. Ali Fatemi. I'm clinical medical physicist, entrepreneur, and the founder of Spentix. Today, I'm so excited to join by Dr. James Robar. James is one of the most innovative leaders in radiation oncology and medical physics. Dr. Robar, clinical medical physicist. He's a professor of medical physics at Dalhousie University. He's a chief science officer at Adaptiiv Medical Technology in Halifax, Canada. James known for his pioneering use of 3D printing and advanced imaging in radiation oncology, which is actually, he will talk about it soon for us. James, welcome to Smart Medicine, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you, Ali. I've been looking forward to this. You and I have been great colleagues over the years. I'm so excited that you're doing this podcast. I've been watching it a little bit on and off, so it's a real honor to be here, and it's going to be fun to chat with you, I think.
Thank you so much. James, I just want to start with your amazing, impressive career that you have, from the time your education from McGill and UBC to the time you're leading one of the Canada most dynamic medical physics program. What really first drew you into this field?
So I was at McGill in Montreal, an undergraduate, and I was doing this interesting double major in human physiology and physics. Who would have thought that, that would actually be a major in a university, which really meant I didn't know what I was going to do in the future. And in my fourth year at McGill, I walked past a building that said medical physics. It was quite lucky that I did that. And I walked into that building eventually, worked up the nerve, and I met some interesting people, notably John Schreiner, who was at McGill at the time, who was a key figure in my career. He gave me an undergraduate project, some pretty simple Monte Carlo calculation stuff, but he was so interested in what I was doing and so encouraging, even though it was really simple. And so that made me think I could get into this, and people are welcoming and encouraging. And then I stayed at McGill for a master's, and I was working in nuclear medicine imaging and PET imaging, where another figure entered my career, Chris Thompson. And Chris is known for really building the very first working BGO PET scanner. They tried to get it working in the US and New York, I think. They didn't, and they shipped it to Montreal, and Chris got it working. And within 1 year, for my project, I worked with a team of engineers and other medical physics grad students, and we built a high-resolution PET scanner for breast imaging, actually, even though we were in the Neurological Institute. And then finally, Brenda Clark with a PhD at UBC in Vancouver. Brenda taught me so much. She basically taught me how to get things done, but also the importance of spinning out good ideas, commercializing, patenting, really going for it. So incredible. I've been so fortunate to have these people in my career,
We always supported by such a group of people. I went through the similar path, helping us through the process. And that's really amazing that how we always have to be appreciative of what they have done to us. James, I have been in Halifax. Me and you met
Mhm.
each other a long time ago. And I actually always impressed by our meeting there. I have seen your team, and I have been in situations like this. I came here to Mississippi, for example. I went to St. John's, Newfoundland. And so when you arrive in the city of Halifax, what was your vision for the program in clinical research there?
Well, keep in mind that I arrived about 20 years ago. So I was just starting out, right? I had just finished my residency in Vancouver. So I can't say I arrived with any grand vision. In fact, when I arrived, I looked around and I thought, this is very antiquated, like even for the time. And to give you an example, I looked at their planning system, and they did not implement or commission multi-leaf collimators in their planning system. I looked at this, and they're planning with fixed blocks. Then they're exporting those blocks onto disks and then converting them into MLCs. And if you have viewers or listeners who don't understand what I just said, it's like there's a technology that's available, that's standard of care, and you have looked at it and said, no, we're good. We're just going to stay where we are and not commission this. And so I didn't arrive with a vision. I arrived with some shock and a bit of despair, maybe. But, that experience was really important and stuck with me through my career. It's like, this is the consequence of seeing a technology that should be becoming or already is standard of care and saying, no, we're fine where we are. This cannot happen in our field. and should never happen from the point of view of giving patients the best treatment. I'm actually glad that I arrived and I made that observation for two reasons. One is it was a real lesson early on in my career. The second is we were able to recover from it. We got that done. We implemented IMRT and VMAT eventually on time, image guidance, all of these significant technologies in our field over time, all the way to having the world's first hypersite imaging equipped ethos unit in the world to enable
Amazing.
adaptive radiotherapy with good imaging. And so that was quite a journey over 20 years. But the lesson that began that was when you're given an opportunity to implement technology, to move the needle in our field, you better say yes. Right. Yeah.
James, I want to get into your 3D printing because
Okay.
I think one of the most fascinating part of your work is that 3D printing. And you actually got it from prototype concept into clinical practice. Can you share how does that began? What problems you were hoping to solve?
Sure. So, I think we knew about 3D printing a little bit before the masses started to see it on YouTube. Everybody around 2013 started 3D printing action figures and bird feeders and everything. 3D printing, though, was an old technology. It's just that the patent expired after 20 years. So we kind of had our eye on it already, but then we had access to it like everyone else did. And, as a clinical physicist, I had endured so many sessions in the quote unquote mold room or a CT simulator where we were making some contraption for a patient out of wax or out of a combination of wax and, wet towels and tape. And, because patients often need a device on their surface, like a bolus, which helps build up the dose to the surface of the patient when you're treating superficial lesions. And elements of our practice and our technology were high tech and are very high tech. And then I would walk into this room and I'd be like, that's a crock pot full of hot wax. And we're putting this on a patient who's a post-surgical patient, building things up layer by layer. How can this be? And then the therapists who were good at this, would be like, look at what I made. Look at this wax piece of art that I made.
True.
And then we would CT scan with the patient with this wax thing on them, and it would be full of holes and not fit the patient. You would see, right? So when 3D printing came along, we were like, wait a minute, we have the data anyway. We have the data for free because every patient has a CT sim, or we have the data upstream from the PACS from diagnostic imaging, an MRI or a CT that happened to capture the anatomy we needed, which was even better because you could make the device even without seeing the patient in your clinic. So it seems so obvious in retrospect, as a lot of inventions do after they're invented, but we ended up getting the foundational family of patents of IP in this area. You asked about, what problem did we want to solve? Because we're physicists, we didn't pick something super simple. We picked modulated electron bolus, where you're actually varying the thickness of the bolus spatially to vary the average energy of the electron beam as it enters the patient, which allows you to conform the dose to the shape of the tumor. And so, I had an excellent graduate student, Shichin Su, who's now in Michigan and was in Michigan and has now moved to Texas, working on that problem. And I was lucky to have him. Smart.
That's good. Can I ask you, what's your next step? What do you guys want to go with that 3D printing technology?
In 3D printing.
Yes.
So it just so happens that I just got back from Toulouse, France, where there was an Estro workshop on 3D printing. And it was very well attended. We had like 40 or 50 people in this workshop in a very small room. And people have taken 3D printing and radiation oncology very far. Like there were things presented there that even I didn't know about. And some of them I think can really be beneficial. So we all know about bolus, 3D printing bolus to fit on patients. The advantage there is elimination of air gaps, more certainty around the dose that you deliver to patients. But some really nice work on, for example, bespoke gynecological applicators, where you're actually, for the first time, you're customizing applicators for the patient that actually fit the patient. And the neat thing is that you are using very smart algorithms to design the trajectories of needles, brachytherapy HDR needles, to treat extensive disease, paravaginal or paracervical disease. And because you can 3D print almost anything you want, you can interface that with the planning system to reach disease that you could never reach before, right? So that, kind of thing, even though that might be seen as an edge case by some people, can really affect tumor control. And so I'm quite excited of operating with a technology like 3D printing in that important part of the TCP NTCP curve, right? Where you're actually impacting.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm also just, James, 2 days ago, I was reading about UCSF medical physicist. He was starting to look at the 3D bioprinting, the cancer cells. So he just want to look at the effect of radiation on these cells. So you just want to look at, as you said, NTCP and TCP. So you basically just want to look at that in vivo on the real cancer cells. So that's actually quite interesting for me, that what is this 3D technologies goes. I mean, we actually also have a Phantom. We're using it. I can't disclose a lot because it's all still actually under patent review, but we use 3D printing technology actually to printing some pieces or some part of it. And it's just amazing that how we can customize it to that precision and level actually we can do. James, also, I know you're the imaging guy. I do a lot of imaging, and I know that you're excited. So I want to kind of looking ahead about the imaging technologies, something like the low MV, and now we talk about high resolution cone beam CT vision, then MR-guided radiation therapy. How does these can kind of reshaping our approach for precision and patient safety in RT?
Mhm.
What do you think we're going? What do you think the future?
I think the future is adaptive radiotherapy. And I say that from experience. I wouldn't maybe have said that a few years ago, but after spending 2 afternoons a week at an ethos unit, what everyone does when they begin adaptive radiotherapy, which is treat low risk prostate, which you see is like the simplest problem, and noticing how much better the adapted plans are, something like 92% of the time, right? That this is the adapted plan rather than the scheduled plan is picked almost always. And I was surprised because these target volumes had substantial margins around them. And you think that those margins would be enough to keep your dosimetry of high quality or not surprisingly bad quality. And to me, that was one of those light bulb moments to see that and to say, oh, that's what is happening when you are accounting for more than shifts and rotations in patients. And when you think back to the appearance of image guidance, like think way back to when cone beam CT first appeared on linear accelerators, we had, somewhat real-time imaging data, right? Let's call it in situ imaging data. And all we chose to do at that time with the data was affine transformations, shifts, and maybe rotations, right? Definitely shifts, which is still the norm. Yeah. We knew that there are very few anatomies in the body that are so well behaved to only shift and rotate, right? I mean, you and I can maybe name 2 sites in the body that behave that way. So we knew we've always known that was insufficient to do that.
For sure.
But at the time, and until recently, the computational firepower wasn't there. The image quality, onboard image quality wasn't there. And the AI hadn't gone through its renaissance that it has over the past, 10 to 15 years to enable smart algorithms for recontouring and replanning. So all of these pieces had to come together. It's so exciting now that they have, but it's also such an awkward time in our field because just like previous technologies like IMRT, people react to this and they say, well, this is very complicated, so we'll only use it for selective cases. That is exactly what was said for IMRT, right?
Yes.
If you think back, we'll
Absolutely.
only use it for head and neck. Guess what? IMRT and then VMAT became our standard of care definitive
Yes.
techniques.
Absolutely.
The same will happen with adaptive radiotherapy. We will have AI-driven approaches or AI-guided approaches that will be universal. It's just that for some cases or some fractions, it will adapt a lot. And for others, it will hardly adapt at all, but it will be a common workflow. So, we have to get there. We have to scale this.
So James, you looks very excited. Do you know any internal secrets you don't want to talk about it? Do you think that there's a new things coming we don't know? And you don't need to talk about it.
Ask me after the podcast. How about
I
that?
know, for sure. Okay. Okay, I will do that for sure. James, I want to talk about your entrepreneurship. Are you one of the few people successful bridging like academic and startups world, through the Adaptiiv? What was the journey like, bringing an idea from academia to the kind of global company like your company?
It's been an amazing journey and actually a little story. So it was around 2011 or something like that, 2013 maybe, where I did an IMRT treatment plan. I was a clinical physicist for a patient with head and neck cancer. Long story short, that patient was cured. He moved to Mexico to retire after that. Avid road cyclist. His name is Bruce Ross. He had enjoyed a very fruitful career, kind of adjacent to our field in medical devices, in imaging, and others. He kept his eye on the patent office at Dalhousie and saw my patent family roll in. And he was like, wait a minute, I had a bolus and it was terrible and it kept falling off my neck. I had a mobilizer and I didn't like that either. So this patient, Bruce, who's now a great friend and mentor of mine, was the one who looked around, having done his MBA in Halifax, and found the business people to come behind this, who then walked into my office unannounced in the clinic and said, should we spin out a company? So I tell that little story because this was really born out of a patient experience, and motivated by a patient. I actually had the choice of just licensing this IP to a big company and saying goodbye, I won't be involved anymore in it, or this adventurous route of spinning out a company. And I'm really glad I took this. I must say that because I was chief of medical physics, I didn't have that much time to spend on the company, hardly any, actually. And so the truth is that I relied heavily on a very effective CEO, Alex Dunphy, who's still the CEO 9 years later. Alex is the one who scaled the company. He's very technically minded. He acted as CTO for part of that as well, spearheaded the regulatory process. Now we're in 20 countries worldwide with our software and 3D printing solutions. But to tell you the truth, Ali, I watched a lot of that from the periphery, and I always felt a little bit guilty about it because I was watching all the people in the company work so hard. So this year in April, I decided to step away from the clinic for a year and dive into the company and really see it for the first time from the inside. And it's been so enjoyable. It's very rewarding to build something and see it grow. A lot of concepts that a physicist would never know about, capitalization, financing, go-to-market strategies, marketing, sales, all of regulatory, all of this has been huge learning experience for me.
Actually, I want to share this with you, James. This is absolutely true. This is very enjoyable. I'm actually working with our chief business officer, basically, the business person. Actually, I'm working with him in the patent and the commercialization. So, Jim, the problem we have as a physicist, we always have an idea. And I always say, hey, Jim, how about this idea? I said, Ali, just hold it. You have to think about one thing and we just go and then make this happen, test it, validate it, looking for IP. And then, this is a problem. I think this is exactly your problem too. So I guess you're going to talking with them and says, hey, I have this idea. I have another idea. And these ideas just kind of stack up and thinking, okay, but you have to kind of make sure that these are fitting into the business model and commercializations. So for that reason, I just want to ask you, what is your advice to the physicist like me and you wants to do this for
Yeah.
innovation? Yeah. So what do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think that very few physicists are cut out to actually do this. I mean, I'll just say that. It is the highs are highs and the lows are lows. And physicists in the clinic feel like they wear a whole bunch of hats, different hats, but believe me, they don't compared to a startup. You are doing a huge spectrum of things at the early stages of a startup company. And the second thing is medical physicists in the clinic are always operating within very well-defined protocols, right? Sure, their R&D lets them break out of that box a little bit creatively, but they are used to having walls around them. And in the startup world, in the entrepreneurship world, those walls do not exist. And that can be very unsettling for a medical physicist who makes that jump. The second thing I would say is imagine a medical physicist like you, or what you describe as having a new idea. I have this shiny new idea. You imagine as you sit there that as you spin out a company, you would spend all your time on that idea, perfecting it, testing it, making it shiny, turning it into a product. Guess what? You won't. when you spin out a company, you will spend 100% of your time, or nearly, on financing that company.
True.
Capitalization on pitching,
Pacing.
which can be extremely humbling, as you know, Ali.
I know.
You will not
Just
be,
told.
you won't even touch your idea until you have that funding, unless you're somehow like very fortunate. So that, I always tell that to medical physicists who imagine that they would like to get into entrepreneurship, and some are okay with that, but most are not.
You really have to have that gene that you say kind of tickling you says, okay, yes, this clinical job is a very important job, and as a clinical makeup is it's always people says it's a secure job, but our job is not really something that is depending on us. So we have to kind of creative and always changing the hat, as you said, pitching, talking, and how you can adjusting your idea and talking with different bandwidth of people to be able to communicate clearly about your idea. And that's I just found it very hard sometimes to explain what is a problem. It's just hard sometimes. James, we're getting to the A of AI. I told you before this, I'm actually consulting with a couple of companies back in San Francisco. They're working on the smart solutions, smart machines. Will they actually coming to the practice of medical physics, medical imaging? What do you think that, there's a lot of kind of mixed messages from people in our community in medical physics. And what do you think about the role of medical physics in this new era? I mean, do you think this is something good or is something bad?
I think it's very good. And it has to be the way. The only question is, how do we get there? How do medical physicists adapt? What does that road look like? What will medical physicists need to feel comfortable and to adopt those technologies? I mean, if we look into the future, the medical physicists will be as fluent in data literacy and AI as they are with dosimetry now. They're going to have to learn how to not micromanage the AI, if you know what I mean, but to trust it. But, we can take some hope because, well, let me just back up a little bit. Medical physicists do not like black boxes, right? They do not. However, they have been presented with black boxes in the past. So think about the transition from conformal radiation therapy to IMRT. So conformal radiation therapy, you could look at the light field from a single beam, and say, oh yeah, that's shaped like the tumor that it's going to intersect with. And you could rationalize this. And then we had IMRT optimization algorithms that converted that into hundreds of tiny little beamlets that were unintelligible to look at. And the physicists said, well, I'm going to have to now look inside that black box and figure out what's going on. And they did, and they saw an optimization algorithm that they could understand, that they could rationalize as well. It was a gradient-based descent algorithm or something that they understood. Even though they understood that, they said, okay, I'll do this IMRT, but I'm going to put a wrapper around it, and I'm going to measure dose distributions for the next 30 years to convince myself that it's okay, right? This is what they required. Okay, there were billing codes in the US that supported that activity. Now that we have patients on the bed and we're adapting and creating new plans in real time and have no opportunity to do that, that's quite absurd. And there are independent validation methods with independent calculations that can be done. So now we look at AI, right? Another black box, even more opaque than the one before. And on one hand, you say, oh my goodness, the physicists are going to need so much reassurance that what is coming out of that is real and trustworthy. Let's take the example of AI-generated treatment plans, right? Can probably be done in hundreds of milliseconds, including a dose distribution and an entire set of MLC apertures for VMAT.
Absolutely. Right? Yes.
So then the question is, what does the adoption of that look like? I actually feel okay about it because there are steps that you can do that we're already doing as part of our QA processes, like independent monitor unit calculations from that set of apertures that don't disrupt the workflow. And so I really think there's a pathway ahead with AI. I'm not a doomsday person with AI at all.
Same here.
And I think that our field has been conditioned over the past decades to handle this change. We'll get there.
This is amazing that you just mentioned about this. I think AI it's a very useful tool. I was talking with the Mike Noseworth. He's an MR physicist. We just talk about it, and we just talk. I came from radiology background, then I got into the therapy physics. You know that, and we're talking about, is it AI going to replace radiologists? And we mentioned about this that no, as a matter of fact, now AI can help radiologists to read more images, so we can give a radiologist more information. We can give him more functional images. We can give more better imaging data, which can make the diagnostic better. So I think AI in that sense can help both sides, radiologists and even the physicists, to generate more meaningful data. And I think that's actually another thing. When we have automations, then say in generating the plans and quality control of treatment plans. So now we can focusing on better technique. Like think about what you have done with 3D printing. That's actually, you are improving the dose conformality that's actually amazing that we do it with that technique, right? So we definitely come up with the new ideas, the techniques can push the boundaries, right?
Well,
And I think it's important.
totally. I mean, the magic happens when two disparate technologies or two disparate fields collide, right? And I mean, speaking of imaging, like when I see the combination of low field MRI and something like deep resolve for MRI, which has been accepted and adopted and is really expected now in MRI, in my world, which is radiation oncology clinics, you have a low field MRI, which lowers at almost a helium-free MR with no quench tube, that lowers the barrier to adopt it dramatically from a siting and institutional aspect. You combine that with AI, which lowers the scan time per unit image quality. It's a magical combination. And it's not just that you get an image faster, it's that it unlocks new workflows in the clinic. For example, skip the CT sim. If your patient is compliant with the MR, can have an MR scan, low field, just do an MR, low distortion MR, use deep resolve. If you want to create a synthetic CT, leverage the tissue discrimination for very good contouring upstream,
Absolutely.
but then bring your patient directly to the adaptive capable unit for a CT sim free workflow. And then you're leveraging the AI again to adapt the contours from the MR onto that high quality cone beam CT that you just acquired. What does that actually mean for the patient? That means that you've probably cut out a week to 2 weeks of a stressful period for the patient. And you got them right onto treatment. Things are going to get better, and good imaging and AI is at the center of that.
James, you train a good number of medical physicists, students. What is your message for these young medical physicists?
Yeah. What I would say is, and I'm imagining a clinical physicist to be maybe somebody in a residency program or wrapping up a residency program. I would say, first of all, look back over the past 10 years or so. You've invested a lot in yourself, in your education, a huge amount, probably a good part of a decade. You're just about to become one of the quite rare people in the hospital who's actually a scientist, right? Which allows you to solve problems. And so my message to a medical physicist at that stage would be, you need to be the agent of change, because it's probably going to be you, and it has to be you. And it's incumbent upon you to be the agent of change, to move the needle in the field. And so that person's going to be looking out to land a job and probably just excited to land any job and be employed, after 10 years of university. But look for a position where those changes are embraced and supported by leadership all the way to the top. This kind of comes back to my first answer of the podcast, right? Don't go somewhere where they say there's a new technology. No, we're good. You have to set your sights high. Don't settle for lowered expectations. Go for it. Actually, my mother gave me a great quote the other day, which is, there's only one kind of fish that swims with the stream, and that's a dead fish. I really appreciated that.
James, we're getting close to finishing our amazing conversations, but I think I just want to ask you something. What excites you about our field? What do you think in medicine?
For me, I mean, a common theme over the past couple of decades has just been personalization. It's personalization in many ways, and we've talked about it here. It's physical personalization, the 3D printed shape of that device that's fitting on the patient, a bespoke device. But there's so much more we have to do. We talked about personalization through adaptive radiotherapy. Nope, we're not delivering the exact same thing every day, day in, day out for 30 fractions. We're actually personalizing it day to day. But there are conspicuous areas of our practice. I'm talking about radiation oncology. Maybe this is a little more focused than your question, but it is conspicuous that we give the same dose and fractionation given a diagnosis and staging to every patient. I'm really interested in personalization of the dose, as well as making things more efficient for patients. Hypofractionation, pushing the limits of precision so that we can hypofractionate most indications. There are exciting times ahead in this field and more broadly in medicine.
I just want to tell you this. I'm actually asking Dan about Flash. What do you think about Flash?
I think that for Flash to really catch on, the Flash effect is going to have to be broad enough over a range of histologies that the effect persists. So, for example, if we see it in only certain cell lines but not others, then given what's actually required for Flash, like maybe proton beam lines at that Flash dose rate, that may not be compelling. However, if we see it very broadly, that is reduced toxicity for the same level of tumor control. And if it may not have to be universal effect, but it has to be broad enough that we will be compelled to do it. And we don't know yet. Everyone's watching the clinical trials very closely. Probably we're going to have to be able to deliver Flash with photons, not only protons. So the technology will have to catch up as well.
Yeah. James, it's an absolute pleasure talking with you. You show how does innovation, research, and entrepreneurship is come together to truly the shape future for the patient care. Thank you so much to be with us. And for our listeners, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. And I'm really appreciate for your warm messages. And I'm Dr. Ali Fatemi. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali.
Thanks, James. Bye.
Take care. Bye.